All right, what's going on, y'all? Welcome to another episode of Adventures in DevOps. I'm your host, Will Button. Joining me, my co-host, Warren Parad. What's going on, Warren?
Thanks, Will. Back again. Actually, this week I'm super interested in the topic that we have lined up because in the last few weeks we've been dancing around different aspects of observability, and this is another flavor. And I have so many difficult questions. I'm hoping our guest can answer.
Ooh, right on. Speaking of our guest, yeah. Rosalind Whitley, Director of Product Marketing for Kentik, the network observability tool for even when the network is not yours, which is really cool. I think that's a super cool just because network observability has changed since the days of whenever I was racking firewalls and routers and configuring SNMP traps.
Yeah.
But welcome, Rosalind. Happy to have you on the show.
Oh my gosh, you said configuring SNMP traps. You didn't know those are the magic words for me to talk about something. You've fallen into a trap, sir. That's so funny. Hi. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Oh, I'm happy to have you here. And I'm looking forward to this because network observability kind of has become a black box. And we were talking about this before we went live here, that it's just something that's kind of abstracted away with your cloud provider, which you have a background in PaaS services. So you're directly experienced with that. And you even mentioned that, some DevOps people these days actively avoid networking just because of the complexity of it. So before we jump into that, give us a little bit about your background, about what you do and how you got there.
Yeah, sure. Thanks. I am, yes, you already said my title. I am a director of product marketing at Kentik, the network observability company. And it's been kind of an interesting journey to get to this place. I think being a marketer for a highly technical product requires a specific skill set. So lots of us do have interesting journeys getting to that point. And I was like a bit of a Unix nerd when I was a little kid. Like my dad got me into like mostly Fedora, right?
Good for your dad.
Yeah, I know.
That's a parenting win right there.
Yeah, totally. Well, yeah. Hi, Dad. That was a parenting win. Good job. And yeah, like he got me into that, and also I kind of wasn't allowed to access the internet unless I could do some basic maintenance on my machine for a while. And I remember when I discovered Flash Video, and then I was like, oh my God, I don't have the drivers for this. And I'd spend hours and hours trying to get that to work. So definitely always more on the software side. I'm not a hardware nerd. And I would say I feel like some deep shame about that. I just never really got into it. But it's interesting because that turned into a career in software. There were some different points at which I was pursuing different things. I have a degree in English literature, but I ended up getting different jobs. And like I would be a secretary, and I'd be like, "Your computer system is really old and crafty. Like, do you want me to fix it for you?" And that turned into a career in tech. It's been really interesting. And my first real proper tech job, I would say, was being on the systems team, and ultimately the team lead of the systems team at the University of New Mexico for learning management systems. So that was my sysadmin job, and that's where I had the pager, and I had to I graduated from Fedora to Red Hat Enterprise Linux, and it was a fun journey. And then after that, I really understood why application delivery and software delivery was important, and what is this DevOps thing. That's when I found out about it. And even though I had played with cloud a lot, so I also have a master's in information systems from Northwestern. And when I was doing that remote, a lot of remote classes for that, I was like, I'm not a hardware nerd. I don't have a machine that I want to sort of build for this purpose. So what is this AWS thing? And that was 2015. So not like very early AWS days, but pretty early when everybody was just playing with it. And Hadoop was really popular then. So I was also playing with that and like managing my own Hadoop clusters in AWS and trying to like find other people in the class who were trying to do it. But that was really interesting. And then anyway, this is going to be a Babel podcast, Babel alert. But yeah, then I started working at Puppet after that, and had some career in DevOps, and ended up at Render most recently, working with really a totally different crowd of folks who want all of that to be abstracted away. Right. And you're right, it's not just PaaS. Like I think networking stuff is buried under layer after layer of abstraction, and we continue to like. Actually, I was listening to one of your episodes of your podcast a couple of days ago about a virtual networking solution from 2021, and that was really interesting. But yeah, like we just abstract all the things, but the thing is, like, still underneath that kernel is still under there. And also all of these, TCP, IP connections, everything is still talking to each other using a lot of the same protocols. We just have gotten to the point where you can be a principal engineer and not know what is going on. You're 8 layers of software abstraction deep, and you're not that deep. It's very deep. It's like things I don't understand, right? Like a lot of the Kubernetes networking stuff, but like you're not at that rudimentary layer. So what Kentik is really about is bridging that. Like how do you get the observability in, like, because the thing is, like 9 times out of 10, you're fine having only that visibility 8 layers deep. You're right. Fine, and you know everything. But then depending upon how much infrastructure you're managing, once every 6 weeks to 6 months, you're TCP dumping for hours and hours trying to understand what's going on because you have no clue what's wrong with your infrastructure, or why, especially latency, why something is not performing as people expect. So yeah, now that's what I work on. I was trying to tell you about my background, but it's a new challenge to be looking at this network observability thing, and observability is super important. So
it's one of those things where it's only important when it's broken, right? Like otherwise you just don't care. And I think that's one of the hard parts is like, how do you know what should I be monitoring or recording ahead of time so that when this does break, I've got enough information to understand which part actually broke.
The spoiler there is whatever you weren't recording.
Right?
Right?
For sure.
Well, and then the tricky game with that too is like, and I remember those days, this one esoteric thing that you need to be observing, like next time you're going to have that data, but that's not going to be the problem. It's going to be it's like whack-a-mole, right?
Right.
So, it's good to have, and I think that's where really the word observability comes in. It's like selling this fantasy that you're going to have all of the data all the time, and then you'll just be able to look across with your crystal ball and observe it all. I think that's the dream, right? That's the dream.
Oh yeah, you'll have like the big TV screen up on the wall with the really cool looking diagram, and when something goes wrong, the right thing is just going to turn red for you, and you'll be like,
yeah,
I've got it.
Oh my God, you like, we say that as a joke, but I've literally been asked for that by an executive in a call. Like, I mean, more than once. Yeah.
I've worked at startups where they set aside some of the money to buy TVs to mount in the office just for that reason. I'm like, no, it doesn't really work like that. I'm sorry.
I mean, and today, like, does that mean you're buying each of your engineers and SRE team, or even in a product engineering team, a monitor to stick on their wall at home so they can just glance over it and see what the current state is?
Oh man, my family would love that. It's dinner time. Oh, just like craning my neck to look over there. Yeah, no. Well, and actually that's what I really like about Kentik though, is it's not really, I mean, we have great dashboards. They're all super customizable. You can put whatever you want on your dashboard and drag the widgets around, and it's very, very easy to customize it to make a dashboard that you want to use. But that's not the core of our product at all.
And no Flash plugins needed, right?
Yeah. Oh God. Oh, I aged myself talking about that. But which, hey, that's a badge of honor.
Right.
I never programmed anything in COBOL, so I don't have that badge. But yeah, so I think what the core of our product is really what we call the data explorer and the metrics explorer. Like exploring your telemetry is really what we're about. So yeah, like dashboards are cool. And once you've done your exploration, like after you had that incident where you figured out what you needed to look at to know what the problem was, yeah, like by all means put that graph on your dashboard, because if it's that again, then you're going to know and you're going to be able to see the history. But really the power of our product is the ability to kind of explore, because what we're really talking about here is unknown unknowns, right? Like that the unknown unknown is that's always the $1 million question. So if you have the ability to ask questions really quickly, get the answer to anything that you need to know kind of in a visual format, be able to compare, what's happening in the last 5 minutes to what happened in the last even maybe 30 days. And you can kind of slice and dice that in a way that makes sense to you, and you can compare and put a lot of different, because this is like high cardinality data, like network telemetry. There's a lot of attributes in that data set. And for Kentik, actually, we add, so our bread and butter is where Kentik started was flow logs, right? So that's a traffic analysis basically was where Kentik started. But if you look at a raw flow log, there are a bunch of different kinds of flow logs. In the cloud, we're talking about VPC flow logs, although they're also called different things from different cloud providers, of course, proprietary. Right. But it's a little hard to make sense of the raw log. And that's another thing. I mean, it's not as bad as TCP dumping, but people don't necessarily want to be like reading through flow logs, one after another. But what we do is we enrich that raw log with like application context, so things like tags, for example, application names, and a bunch of other network-y stuff that I don't necessarily know a lot about, but so that you can understand kind of all of those layers and you have context. So you're never looking, it's not like you're using Kentik to look at the raw flow log, or now we do metrics too from cloud and from devices. We enrich that data as well. So you can kind of draw a line between the different data points that you're trying to understand. And you can do those as a line graph or as a sand key, or you can look at it in a table. Like there's a lot of different ways to visualize the data and understand it. And that's really where the power is, because a dashboard, back to the dashboard thing, a dashboard is like, it's only as good as what you knew to put on the dashboard. Right. And that is, and there was some kind of meme about being in sort of a post dashboard or dashboard fatigue. I think there's some memes out there. I can't think of them right now. So, but really, like what you really want to do is explore the data and understand it. Like you want to be able to find things and do that quickly. I think that's really like the promises of observability. It goes beyond the dashboard, and it's really about it's about harnessing all of the telemetry that you can to power your human brain. Like it's like there's all of this information that can quickly overload me. So just take everything that looks like it always has and ignore that and show me what changed. Yeah. Show me what changed. Like anomaly detection is definitely huge in our space, because even if I think that's where we can make things more accessible to folks who don't have a ton of network engineering background or passion. It's like, I don't really need to understand the nitty gritty of what is different here. Just show me that it's different and then I can dig into that and I can Google it and I can understand it.
Right? Show me what to Google.
Show me what to Google, right? But like that's our job now, right? Like that's the truth. So it's really nice to be able to, I guess the marketing term is democratize. So to kind of democratize access to network data and bring it into the 21st century, because a lot of the tools that are used by network engineering teams have been around for a long time. And because this is old technology that hasn't necessarily changed that much at its core. So yeah, it's important to be able to have observability into all of these different environments, like your public cloud, like your PaaS and all that. Yeah.
Where does in the process do you see these tools being used? Like, is it that there is some sort of alert or some problem in production, my environment, and now I need to investigate further and I'm not even sure where to start? And then at that moment, it's like, well, while it's so great that I had this tool that was already ingesting all of my VPC flow logs and I'm going to it and reading through what's there and the anomaly detection runs and tells me about some sort of network issue. Is that the sort of flow that you think about here?
It depends because, good question. Kentik is a platform, and we have a few different kind of products in there. And so, yes, but high level, yes, there are alerts. So if I have a faulty device or a device that's having software or hardware problems, then I can get an alert on that. I can have all of my devices onboarded. So that's like in the data center, right? It similarly in the cloud, I can set alerts on different thresholds. There's actually alerting is very complicated in itself because there are different kind of schemes for what would trigger an alert. And alert fatigue is also a meme, definitely something you've probably talked about on the show. So it's important to have a sophisticated ability to set the alerts and kind of fine tune what is actually on fire and what's not. So we certainly have that capability for all the types of environments that we provide observability into. And so what I've seen, we work with a lot of big enterprises, and I have heard like, hey, the network team gets called into every single incident. So every time there's an incident, someone from the network team is on the call, and they may get a question of like, this application stack it seems like it's experiencing latency, and what is it? And the classic question is like, is it the network? And there's even like this sort of idea of the mean time to innocence, which I'm sure you've heard of. And that's like, right. They're trying to absolve themselves of responsibility. But I think that's real because they really do get called into every incident. And then, what percentage of the time is it the network? Probably not that great of a percentage of the time. But I think where we're at now is that even when I'm doing air quotes, but you can't see them on the pod. Even when it's not the network, I think the network engineering team can provide insight into, because we're in like the world of microservices and definitely distributed computing. So if I've got traffic going from one service to another, and then the traffic's not going from the next service to the next service, like that's information that I can use to understand and zero in on like, I don't know. Yeah. This weird presentation layer thing is like getting hung up, and here's where it's happening. So I think, but the tools also get used for other stuff like capacity planning. Capacity planning is really important because we're not just about incidents. We're also about, providing reliability and resiliency. That's also our job these days. And like latency is sort of the new outage sometimes, I think. So it's not just about promoting availability, but also like making sure that performance is what your customers expect all the time. We all have very high expectations for that. So anyway, capacity planning is really important. So understanding, like if I do have in my hybrid cloud infrastructure, if I do have, data requests that are traveling across a cloud interconnect pipe, we call it a pipe, then I want to know, like, what's the capacity of that pipe? Am I filling it up? Like, when am I filling up at surges? How do I manage? And different kinds of gateways, like in the cloud, for example, have different properties and different performance that I can get out of those. And kind of how I set everything up, I'm always balancing cost with performance to make sure that folks are going to get the performance that they expect at a cost that I can afford. So that's and because people don't necessarily know very much about networking, even when they're designing workloads in the cloud, they may have something set up like with a transit gateway actually you can see in Kentik, you can look at things on a map and see like how the traffic is traveling. And sometimes you're like, oh, it's going out there and then it's coming back in. Like, why is it doing that? Sometimes it might be doing that for a reason, like it's a firewall thing. But other times it's just the way that some dude set it up. And you can change that and you can realize performance gains and cost gains from that. So that's like another place where the tools get used beyond kind of alerting. It's also about being proactive. Yeah.
I feel like you kind of called me out there because that's my incident response run book is blame the network team. And I know it's probably not them, but it at least buys me time to figure out what's really going on while they're trying to prove their innocence.
But yeah, because that's not a fast thing to do, right? There's like, how do I absolve myself of culpability here is quite the challenge.
No, it's true. But hey, I think like I've been there. So that's why I've never been a network engineer. So I was always calling, I've got an issue with one of my applications. I'm calling the network team and they managed our virtualized infrastructure. So all of the vSphere sort of infrastructure. So I think probably what were they doing when I was calling them? They're like restarting this right. Node to see if it's the problem and watching it fill over and stuff. But yeah, while they were doing that, I was just, desperately like grepping through logs and trying to look for a pattern, right? Because it could come back on me for database administration stuff. It was always fun for me when it was the database because I was also secretly kind of wanted to be a DBA and studied that in school. So I would be much more of an active partner. Like I would be, and I think there was more information. Like in my application logs, I could find stuff. I could find, Oracle errors or MySQL errors that would be like smoking gun material. And then I would go and do these extended kind of research into what was going on because I cared about kind of how they were implemented on the application side and what the interplay was. So I was more of an active partner on that. But for the network, I was exactly like you, Warren, just like, all right. And yeah, like all of us, right? I think we're all in the same boat. It's like, you need that network engineer when you need them. You really.
I got so scared when you mentioned the DBA thing because I feel like there was a non-trivial number of times where a DBA did stand up and be like, "Oh, you know what? We know what was going on, and we ran something and it fixed it." And I'm just like, I don't want that to be the answer.
Oh yeah, because you want to be the hero. But then the thing is the alternative, the alternative is potentially that, like, if it really is your problem on the application layer that you, or, even the OS layer was in my book, in my experience, like, if it really was my fault, it probably literally was my fault. Like it was some kind of typo that I had made during an upgrade months before. And then like I go in there and I find like, oh God, like there's a carriage returned there. That's bad. And then, do you really want to be explaining that? Probably not. So it's
I feel something about it for me that feels justifiable though. Like I could be like, hey, look, there's a typo here. Clearly that's causing the problem. And, by change, and everyone can look at that. But when there's a problem on the network side or on the database side, and there's an issue there and it gets resolved somehow, I know having been on the other side so frequently that I honestly could not grok what they're telling me, like what the fix was. Adding extra nodes or replacing them or something about the routing is very difficult to understand.
It's true. And you wonder, like, is this going to be another sleepless night? Like, is this going to happen again? Because sometimes we would have that. It would happen once and they would be like, oh, we fixed it. We ran this thing or we restarted this thing. And then like 2 weeks later, it happens again. And this time it's faster, they fix it. But yeah, no, you're right. I get it. But I mean, this is all, it's all part of the thing. And you're talking about root cause analysis. And I think like what we talk about a lot at Kentik is sort of this holy grail. And that is, how far are we into the conversation? We're 25 minutes into the conversation for the record, and I am going to utter the phrase AI, right?
I was wondering that was going to come up.
I can't believe I got 25 minutes into this call without uttering the phrase AI, but yes.
Oh, but look, our live subscriber count just went up too. There you go.
Yeah, but I mean, really, that's the magic, right? If you can get something that can do some of that for you and say, hey, this is probably it. Why don't you check this? And let me say it like that. It's not, I do not think that we are close to having a distributed computing experience where an AI bot can say, it's this, I'm going to fix it now. That's not what it is. It's really about like that bot still has to talk to tier 3, right? Like we are still tier 3 and we need to be able to look and see, but it's really just about making that faster and saying, hey, there is a carriage return here in this script and there shouldn't be. And if you fix that, it'll probably resolve this. I think that's kind of that's what everyone's sort of working towards right now. And I think different companies are different, are farther along, and certain disciplines, it's easier to get further along because automation has been part of it for a long time. So it's easier to kind of get there. But for us, where we are at is, if I say we can answer any question about your network, the networks you own or the networks that you don't. That's true. And now we have a query assistant, and we have an interface called Journeys that allows you to essentially have a chat GPT-like session with Kentik where you say, hey, compare the bandwidth like on these devices over the last month and show me, or what are my top consumers. You can ask it any kind of questions. Show me my devices that are in this region and what are the status of all of them, and sort them by, you can do all of that. And instead of doing it in our GUI, in our GUI data explorer, like I was describing earlier, where you've got to, find all the attributes that you care about and check them all as, when you have like such high cardinality data and you have like a heavy ability to manipulate it, it's a lot of checkboxes. It's kind of a lot to look at. And it's hard to create a UI that feels really easy to use. But I think the chat, the natural language query facility really helps us like do that data democratization, right? Because, you're afraid of the network, but you probably know what kind of question you have. You could start asking, and then the query assistant and in a journey, especially, you can look back and see like what questions did other people ask? Because like we said, sometimes it's the same thing again that happens, right? So if you want to go back and look at what queries folks made before and so they started with this question, but they finished their session and they answered the question here at the end. That was what really led them to understand what was going on. You can look back through that and see, what was that root cause essentially. And then I think the next step of that for us is suggesting what questions to ask next, suggesting what the root cause might be. When this problem shows up, a lot of times, here's the answer. So that's what we are working towards. Yeah. And yeah.
I think you said it before it's about finding the unknown unknowns. And I feel like that may be something where AI helps us a lot there in discovering those. And I'm sort of curious if any interesting things have already popped out that wouldn't have been so obvious, either if you were looking at the dashboards yourself or had to create the queries yourself, because that sort of goes along the lines of, I already sort of know what the problem is, but I want the data to prove it. And I think there is this challenge of, well, I don't even know where to start. Give me something, suggest to me something, and maybe I'll pull at that instead.
Yeah, we definitely have kind of a splash page with a bunch of kind of sample queries on it. So you can just click and get started. Like, okay, I'll jump into this investigation. I don't know if I have any stories of like the unexpected findings, but that's a really good one to. I mean, we were talking a little bit about marketing. That's a really good one to dig up. I think it's just like, how long would it have taken you to figure out that this was the problem, or how long would it have taken you to observe this difference? I think I would say for Kentik though, there are a lot of very talented network engineers who have been using Kentik to dig into their flow and their metrics for quite some time. So I would hesitate to say that AI can find anything that they can't find, because I think like a super user of Kentik is still far more powerful than an AI bot of Kentik. But together they can be unstoppable, I think is the idea. Yeah. But I will look for that.
And so that's one of the areas where something like Kentik can help out, because we've talked about how like, some of us have like really, not putting myself in this group, but there are people who have like really, really deep, long areas of expertise. And, like as I get older, I kind of feel like that's more and more of my job, is to distill what I've done over the last 30 years so that people entering the industry right now don't have to relearn all of that stuff. And I think that's one of the things that like companies like Kentik do, is it's like, hey, based on all of this stuff that you don't know about, here's this thing that you might want to Google.
Yeah. No, I think that's going to be where this really has legs. I mean, it's really nice to be able to explore the data in natural language, and you can ask it in any language you want. So that's helpful even for like ESL folks on your team as we get globalized. So I think there's like a lot of power just in the entry level of a query assistant. But yeah, where I start to drop my AI skepticism in earnest is where it can say like, yeah, you are, because like we said, if it's a different problem every time, you really do have to work on this for 20 years to see like a full range of what it could be. And for these folks who are dealing with, heterogeneous infrastructure where they may have some really old legacy applications that they're maintaining, or, we call them legacy applications. They have some applications that are still working, still making money, and they don't want to change anything because, and the bosses don't want to change anything. Right. And then they have all this new infrastructure that's getting built, and they're running workloads on Kubernetes, and so they've got containerized stuff, and they're also doing serverful stuff, and they need to like keep track of all of that. How can you hold the context of all of that in your mind? And I think that's way beyond what any of us who were kind of doing things in the old days. I think it's very different now. I think that they have a lot more context to keep track of. So what I'm really happy to hear you say that, Will, that's your goal, is to help them as essentially a shortcut, right?
Right.
Because
yeah.
when I think about like old school ops culture, and definitely old school like Linux culture, it's a bit, you're smiling. Yeah, you know what I'm going to say, right? It's not that. It's not
the most welcoming environment, or it wasn't. I should say it wasn't the most welcoming environment.
Yeah, I think it was a lot of like, I mean, it's all over Stack Overflow. If you want to go to Stack Overflow and like dig through, it's like people are like, I can't believe you would post that. Like, people very rudely explaining how it's just unacceptable to post such a question without posting your entire, and like, don't post your entire log trace in here, like to cut through, like show me that you did the research yourself,
right?
And that you tried to understand this yourself, and then I will help you. And that there's really like a tension between that, because I think that definitely like the potentially discouragement of asking questions is of course also part of old school network engineering culture. There's a lot there's a lot of similarity there. And I think it's really the same culture. And then there are people like yourself who want to, benevolent folks who want to pass along that knowledge and kind of be greater than the sum of our parts. So as a marketer, I feel like I have to sort of appeal to that culture that where credibility and like doing the legwork is really valued and really important. But at the same time, like, I mean, the boss doesn't really want to pay for the legwork if it doesn't need to be done. If you're paying
Right.
for your talent, then you want that talent to spread around the team. You don't want to be siloed into one person. And then also there's this new, I think Kubernetes was a huge part of that sort of transformation from the old culture that you're talking about to the new culture. I think the way that the Kubernetes community like came up and then was managed has been a huge part of that. Do you think so? Are there other factors like why are those answers not on Stack Overflow, not getting on Stack Overflow as much anymore? Like what's changed, I guess, my question.
I feel like right around the time that Kubernetes came out, there was like a pretty significant shift of people. There was like enough people who found each other online that were tired of that type of response. And
Yeah.
I think it came together in several areas, Kubernetes being one of those. But one of the things that continues to make me laugh is whenever they said that ChatGPT was trained using Stack Overflow answers. I was like, oh, this should be good.
I mean, great, brilliant, but also wow. ChatGPT
Yeah.
doesn't ever scold me though. I don't think I've ever been scolded by ChatGPT.
I
You're
think
just
there
not
are
trying hard
some.
enough.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe not ChatGPT itself, but I do recall some of the other LLMs giving responses through some of the other websites that may have been using the same underlying model about that they were wrong to ask the question, and then when saying and there was a whole back and forth about it, and really just over and over again saying, no, you have no idea what you're talking about, even though clearly, like everyone knows that the person that was chatting was right, but the bot was definitely confused. You actually said something super interesting that I don't want to gloss over, is that potentially the problems that are being solved today are actually more challenging. They require more context than they did in the past. And I sort of want to pick your brain on that a little bit, because that seems like it's really interesting, that maybe it's possible that the problems today are more complicated, are more difficult to solve, and that we won't be able to do it with the same tools that we've been utilizing up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I think to clarify there, maybe the individual problems themselves are still like when you do know what the root cause is, maybe that root cause is no more sophisticated in nature than like a problem of yore. But I think what makes it more challenging is just we're talking about cardinality of data, and it's just like the volume of different, like the probability that it would be any one thing is so much lower, I think, because of the distributed nature of our systems. But then it is also when we talk about like things when I talk about things being so software defined, I think that also adds another. So maybe there is more complexity introduced by like the programmatic nature of so many things. So you can have is this really a problem with the thing that I'm trying to manage, or is it a problem with like the way that the thing that I'm trying to manage is accessible or is administered? So I think there's just all of those layers add more automation, but then also add like the potential for failure. And I think part of it is also because, are we ever using things exactly as they were intended? Like when you design a product, when you design a tool or a platform, or design a piece of infrastructure, you're oftentimes thinking about doing it, in a specific context. And then when you take those things out into the wild, again, heterogeneous land, they're trying to kind of put it all together, right? Trying to connect things together and integrate different systems. And that's where, I mean, those are like the longest Googling sessions, right? You try to interface one thing with another, and you think you're like, well, this could go one of three ways. Like, it could be super easy, the exact way I think that you're supposed to do it. It could be like this middle way where I have to try a few things, but it's one of these answers that are on the internet. Or it could just like fail kind of silently, and I don't know why it doesn't work. And then I'm kind of stuck, and I have to figure out, like, do I need to figure out a different way to integrate these together? Like, is this not going to work? I need to figure out when to cut over and give up. And I think there's just more of that now, right? Like, there's more potential for that to come up. Would you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think you really hit on something with the volume, where in the past, just the number of requests you'd have to any individual service is such a low number with the number of users you have. That's still providing a ton of value. You could go through the logs manually, right? You think about your own operating system, you can go to the syslog and see what's there or whatever you're using, and actually see what applications crash and what the log message are, if you're debugging locally. But when you talk about the production systems now, today in 2024, yeah, I mean, you're not going through that manually.
No.
Well, I think we're at a point now where the level of abstraction is so high that it's a really, really fine line between whether we are software engineers or whether we're Rube Goldberg engineers.
We're integration engineers for sure, 100%. Well, I mean, you're right there on that. Like, most of the time you're spending out there is connecting components together to deliver the value. You're not I mean, you could be on the cutting edge of designing the new silicon or even the LLM model today, but like lots of companies have spun up, you're building on top of that, which is hundreds of layers of abstraction deep.
Yeah. And if it's not working, it is that thing of like not knowing where to start. I can't let it pass that you said Rube Goldberg machine. When I worked at Armory, which was a proprietary distribution of Spinnaker, the continuous delivery tool developed at Netflix. I was there. What was I? I was director of open source, and really like a open source DevRel person. And I had this brilliant idea that we would buy this. The culture there was very like, spend money on invest in the things that you think will be good for the company, and like you're empowered to do that. I was like, I feel empowered to build a very large Rube Goldberg machine, and we are going to cart this thing out to every event. Like, we're going to go to AWS. This is going to be our big like AWS reInvent bid, where we have a giant Rube Goldberg machine, and then we do demonstrations. I still think that would be fun. Now somebody's going to listen to this and lift that idea, who has a much bigger budget than I do. But it really is a Rube Goldberg machine. Like, it really is. And
that would be great to go to AWS or reInvent or whatever and just see a big, huge Rube Goldberg machine. It just goes all the way up to the ceiling of the auditorium.
Yeah. And then it's like, probably this is canceled maybe, but like, I think about Pee Wee Herman and that opening sequence where he's making his breakfast and the egg comes in the spoon. Yeah, I'm telling you, marketing gold. But that was kind of the message. It's so funny because like the message was the same there. It's like, we have all these sort of brittle, we called it brittle. That's another marketing term. Like your brittle path to production. It was sort of how we talked about it. And sometimes it really does feel like a Rube Goldberg machine. And I think when I'm looking at that from the observability perspective, it's really the same visualization. It's like, yeah, you have this bespoke way that each one of your applications is getting these very basic communications across, like to and from the user, and getting the data and getting and doing the CRUD on the data in a way that's secure. And there's actually a lot that goes into that, but really, like, it does feel like a Rube Goldberg machine, I think, but it's also still the same stuff. So it's just interesting how it's more abstraction over what are fundamentally the same types of interactions. But what has changed a lot is the user experience, right?
Yeah, for sure.
We have gotten the entire planet addicted to an impeccable user experience, and we can never come back from that. We have to.
I wish that were the case, but I still feel like I see some UIs every day that make me question who is running UX over at that company.
Any government website.
Oh yeah. Well, yeah. That's all. I mean, government, healthcare, it's like,
Yeah.
and but it's actually like, it makes me think about, so I once interviewed with a company that made software for planes. And they told me about the sort of I ended up not taking this job, but it was really interesting. And they were like, we are such a like pioneering company in this space because we figured out that if we can run the software on a tablet, like we can run the software on an iPad, then we're able to get around so much regulatory stuff because the TSA has rules, or no, the Federal Aviation Administration has all these rules about what is physically bolted to the plane. So if something is physically connected to the plane, then it has to go through literally years of like safety and regulatory process to check to make sure that it's safe. But if your software system is not physically connected to the plane and you can like lift it off, then they didn't have to go through the same regulatory procedure. And I thought that was so fascinating. But they were like, that's why airplane systems are so far behind, because they are not like, they can't. So if you want to change the UX, right, it's going to take you like 5 years. So that's why I think that for government stuff, but I don't know. I think for government, a lot of times they just don't put the money into it, and they don't. It's just not a priority.
Well, I mean, I think we know that there's definitely money going into it. It's just where the money is going is the challenge.
That's an episode on its own.
Yeah,
one that'll probably end us up on a watch list somewhere if we have it.
Yeah, I just maybe that's a banned topic. I've worked in a lot of different industries that have varying degrees of regulation, and there is definitely something to be said about the amount of regulation and the length of the feedback loop for improvements, for sure.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. But yeah, you said people aren't addicted to great. Well, people are addicted to great UX. But you still have to find it, right? You still have to go and find those tools and platforms that have that have the space that you want. I don't know. I think if I think about though, like how much things have changed in the last decade in terms of just what consumer expectations are, I think it has changed a lot, and I think a lot of people have worked really hard on making that happen. So it's pretty cool. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, we are very much in a position where our expectations are, millisecond latency. From applications, and for the most part, I feel like our expectations are rarely not met when it comes to that, and that's a huge amount of effort and under the covers work. That you can hit a vast majority of the websites, and you click the button and it makes a call to the backend API and returns the data in a millisecond time frame. And then tying that back to what you're doing, the layers of networking that are happening there is just really tough to visualize, much less troubleshoot whenever it does breach that 100 millisecond threshold.
I hope I'm not breaking anyone's understanding here. There is actually some research posted. The research says that the more effort that a user puts in to having an action executed, the longer they actually expect to wait. And if you respond too fast, that they'll feel like, wait, I don't understand. How could that be the case? Realistic, like this actually does happen. So we internally, actually, especially in our UIs for Authoress, we do actually measure the amount of expectation for the effort that a user should have to put in for those things, and figure out like what is their expectation going to be for how long that activity takes. If they expect that thing to happen really fast, then those make it into our SLAs. And for things that actually seem like they're super complicated, well, there is a little bit of fudging that we have to do there to make it seem like that they get the appropriate thing. Like there are intentional waits in some situations to make, because it's too fast. We respond in like 1 millisecond. They're like, I don't understand how it can be that fast. That doesn't seem right. So you make it wait a little bit longer. And like it also has a UI impact though too, because if you make an action and the page would refresh or something like that afterwards, you don't have any time to say, hey, your thing was successful. So actually delaying that has a much better user experience than just immediately performing the next thing in some circumstances.
That is really interesting. So that's really like we're almost hitting a threshold or something, like hitting a threshold of human, like human computational power or something. I'm gonna have to reach out to my buddy on our product team who I've been working with, who is putting out our network monitoring system. So network monitoring systems, I don't know if you've used them. You may have used some of the free ones like Libra NMS. Everybody has one, and everybody with an on-premise network device of any kind has some kind of thing that's going to tell them if it's up or down, right? And almost all network monitoring systems are really old and crufty, like they're your federal website version of a tool. And that's like actually, so we put out this new network monitoring system that we released at the end of January. And it does have, it has the query assistant that I talked about before built in. But it's really interesting to try to write marketing copy for this and figure out how to sell it to people, because really what we're selling is like, no, we haven't really, like, yes, we have like a data explorer, metrics explorer that lets you explore all these unknown unknowns. We have AI. It's a SaaS tool. And that's all exciting, but also under the covers, it's doing the same thing. It's polling your devices to find out if they're up or down. But anyway, you just made me think about one of the things we talk about as a selling point is browser refresh is not required. So like, we're literally like selling that it's a responsive app. Yeah. So if my device if I'm onboarding a new device and I'm waiting for it to finish and then it comes up, that's just going to happen. I don't have to refresh the page. But really, so constantly going back to our conversation about incidents, if you think about a network person trying to, like, it was the network, right? They figured out that it was this device that was having a problem, that was had a hardware or a software problem usually. And they go to fix it, like they go log into the device and reset it or something, or change threshold. And then you have to wait to see if it works, right? Like before you can go back to sleep or go back to your regular job, but sometime before you can go back to sleep, you have to see if it works. And so we have this image, and I really want to make an ad for this of just someone just like refreshing the page, and they're looking to see like for that change. So I think it's definitely a fine line. Like, you're right. It could be too fast, but there are a lot of systems out there that are nowhere near too fast. And we're still, but it's funny because my colleague, my PM colleague is like, I'm like, we've got to sell that it's a SaaS tool. And I think I put on something the other day, SaaS innovation. And he was like, don't say that. SaaS has been around for a long time. I know that, but it really is innovative in this space. So it's funny. I think the point here is like, it's all relative, right? But it is nice when you need to use a tool, like you have a tool like an NMS, and you've got you've got to monitor those devices. It's nice to have a platform that doesn't make you feel like you're living in, I don't know what year, 2004 maybe.
That may be even still too recent. I mean, you made me think of like every router software ever, that like not only do you need to wait, but it tells you do not refresh the page, because if you do, like, I am afraid that it will brick itself.
It's going to lose your request. It's going to somehow lose your request if you refresh the page. Yeah.
I'm just like, what is it doing? It's just like, what is it doing? Honestly, like, and then it tells you if like another admin logs in to the router at the same time. Like, I'm sorry, only one admin can be logged in at this time. It's like, okay, I mean, fine. Just give me read-only mode then, right? Like, let me see the data, but don't let me change it for whatever reason.
No, totally. So you can see how this has been like selling a network monitoring system in 2024 isn't just about the unsexiest task that a technical marketer could have, right? Like, it is not, like, we are not, and like you mentioned SNMP traps at the beginning. We actually came out with this tool, and we're like, we're not going to support SNMP traps because, it's UDP and it's not very secure. And we're a little uncomfortable with that. But as we've gone out into the field, to talk to folks about this tool, and we've onboarded like some huge enterprises into using this tool. And we've found people out there in these conversations who are like, well, I'm using SNMP traps extensively. And it's essentially, but like, why they're doing it, because it's event, like it was really, really, really early implementation of essentially like event-based monitoring. So the device has an event and it can go, oh, hey, I'm having a problem. Like that was cool, right? And it still is cool. And a lot of people are really relying on that. But for us to come out and say, well, sorry, that's too crafty. Like we are not going to support that because we do not like we can't do that. So we have to build the support. We have to build the support, and we have to find a way to build it in a way that will be that we can feel like it's secure enough to give over to our customers, but they can feel like it fits into their workflow. So anyway, that's a digression from like the browser refresh thing. But I think there's a lot to like that it's been a fun marketing challenge to try to market this tool that's been around for it's been around for 25 years, right?
I mean, we actually did something very similar in our space so we offer auth for as a SaaS, and we started by saying, no, we're not going to have password support by default. Like this is obsolete technology. It's insecure by design. There's no fixing that. And we went into the B2B market, and it's been fine. It was fine for a very long time. And then we started getting customers who wanted to go into B2C and have end users that didn't have sophistication. And so we've created a clear separation in both marketing and how our docs are written, to be clear, like, hey, if you're in the B2B context, like you really don't want to use this. Like, look at the research. It's going to tell you why there's no reason. And if you're in B2C, maybe there's not anything you can do about that.
Yeah. No, I think that, oh gosh, this is the worst term, but they call that thought leadership, right? You're educating your customer. That term really makes me want to barf, but I hear people say it every day. It's the worst. But anyway, no, you're educating your customers about like, hey, and I think that's valuable. I think technical folks, like when you're shopping for a product, you do want to know that the vendor you're working with is opinionated about the right way to do things and has really thought about that at scale and looked at how other people are doing it. Like you want those best practices. Because again, when you're trying to navigate this Rube Goldberg machine, there's a lot there and you don't necessarily know what the best practices are for everything. And like everything else, you got to Google that. And and it's good to have a trusted source for that. So I think that's the right way to handle that. It's just be really honest about it.
No, for sure. Because otherwise you don't really have a differentiator, right? Like anyone can write the technology that you don't see, the service that's running. Anyone can hire the right people with enough time and effort and, maybe even get funding. I mean, like where do you differentiate, right? And it's going to have to be on the way your company mindset or values really, really operate.
Yeah.
Is really what's left there.
Yeah, totally.
All right. And so that's a great segue into the topic that I wanted to talk about here, because a lot of that, you're talking about implementing a cultural change, like in the SNMP traps, like someone who says, hey, these SNMP traps have been rock solid, reliable for me for 25 years. Why am I going to change? And so you have this change that you have to implement, which goes into marketing. And I really think that's like an unspoken skill that successful engineers have, is the ability to understand marketing and know how to introduce these topics and like convince people to your line of thinking. So with your background, Rosalind, your role is marketing to technical people. So how do you, for just at the risk of saying something stupid, because that's kind of my role here, how do you make your marketing content nerdy enough to be believable?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think where it starts is you really have to have the right, and I mean, I'm not saying I'm necessarily the right person, but you have to have, we have a whole content team actually of people who like, okay, if you're a network engineering nerd, which you're not, you'll know Doug Midori, who's the director on our content team, who is like, gets called by the NSA and by other federal and international agencies to do like tracing traffic for like to help with global like geopolitical stuff. Like he's the one who goes and looks and understands what Russia is doing with the networks in Ukraine. And so that's an extreme example, but we have a variety of like folks who were in the field, like we're kind of wearing the shoes of our customer, and those are the people who write all of our blog posts, and they sort of promote the brand. And me, so I sort of had some shoes that looked like I had some systems engineering shoes at one point. They're still in my closet, but I don't wear them very often anymore. And like those skills go away. So, but with someone like me, like I write what I'm gonna write. Like I write what I'm gonna communicate to customers about a product. And then a lot of times so I mentioned my product manager colleague working on that network monitoring tool. He also had his sort of network engineering shoes that he put away much more recently. And then he worked at a very prominent network monitoring company before he came to Kentik. So he's really like just like dug into the space. And he is like my sounding board for all of this marketing stuff. And we call it go to market. Like we collaborate on stuff together. So I think it's really about, you mentioned like an engineer who has the skill of understanding marketing and being able to communicate that across to their team and bring folks along. That's really important. And I think that's the skill that like when you're working on marketing in a B2B company for a highly technical product, which I have now done at a bunch of different companies, like cross-functional collaboration is the name of the game. If you can because you've got your people in the field, right? Especially if you're working at a company that sells to enterprises and it's a bigger thing. I think this was different for me at Render because we were more of it's a B2B company, but it's a bit more of a direct-to-consumer model because people just go on to Render or Heroku and they like set up their services and they're sort of self-serving. So that was a bit of a different model, but now I'm back in this sort of enterprise selling model where you have your sales folks and specifically sales engineers and solutions architects who go out into the field and they're knee deep in those customer problems. Like they're inside the Rube Goldberg machine trying to help the customer find their way out. And so they really can see like those themes. So sometimes having some of those people react to your work, but it's more like listening. So I go on to our Gong calls. Like I listen to their conversations with our customers. I listen to the words that customers use to talk about their problems. And I look for patterns, right? And then when I think I've found the patterns, then I take those to my product manager colleagues or my colleagues on the content team who are more technical than I am. And I say, hey, like, how does this land with you? And sometimes it lands really well. And sometimes they have ideas and then I got to massage those ideas. But then what's interesting about it is like, so we just came across this with a product that really all of our products trying to work towards this. Like, you have I call it practitioner messaging, and then you have your buyer messaging, and they're different, but also in our field, they're not that different because most of the buyers used to be practitioners, and there's that credibility thing. We talked about that line of like credibility, I think is still really important in our field. And like, you can't be a buyer for a highly technical system and like run a highly technical team if you don't like demonstrate that those shoes are still in your closet. I think
Right.
you kind of need to like have that badge. So I guess my short answer to your question, which this is not short at all, never is with me, but my short answer is like having had those shoes in my closet, and like I call on that a lot. I play that card a lot. Like that's I think critical to like my ability to be in this role, but it's also important to like bridge that with the higher level sort of value messaging. And you mentioned like that bringing people, engineers having a skill of bringing people along. I think that's a skill to give them too, is be like, this is really technical and you're in the weeds and you really like this solution and I want to sell it to you, but you need to get budget for this solution and you need to explain like how it's going to impact your bottom line. There's really only a few ways to sell a product to a buyer, right? It's either going to save you money or it's going to save you time, which is ultimately going to save you money.
Right.
Or it's going to give you a significantly better end user experience, which is going to make you more money. So it's really just all about the money and like helping them understand that I think is really like helping them understand and giving them, I mean, they understand it, but that's condescending, but like giving them what they need to be able to communicate that in a way that they feel like doesn't make them want to barf. I think that's another like thing that a technical product marketer does, is like empowering people to be a champion, right?
Yeah. So like once they have signed off on the technical solution, giving them the tools to make the financial case.
Yeah. Yeah. Like once you've got, because with Kentik, like people are, I think we definitely have had sort of what I would think of as a bottom up sales motion, in that like network engineers freaking love Kentik. Like there are network engineers out there, and we have this where like we started in the service provider market. So we have a ton of customers in the service provider market, and a lot of network engineers will work at a service provider and then they'll switch over to enterprise, and different challenges. But there's a lot of the big enterprises are basically running their own service provider internally to meet their network engineering demands. And so we'll have people who switch over, and if they've used Kentik before, like they're going to want to use it again. So that helps. And like you have to have both, right? Like you have to get the practitioners to fall in love with your product and want to use it, and it has to be sticky. But then you also have to make a business, like you have to be able to make a business case for it, because otherwise you end up like, I mean, I said I worked at Puppet, sad story, used in so much of the 90% of the Fortune 500 or something like that. And they were never really able to monetize it. And Docker is the same story, right? We still use Docker everywhere, but they couldn't make money off of that because they didn't make that business case. And I think that's a whole other episode of the podcast too, but like to me, that makes me sad, right? It makes me a little sad, because what a great product. So,
yeah. And both of those specifically, like every time they try to make a change to where they can actually make enough money to operate the company, we go out of our ways to find out how we can continue using that tool without having to pay for it.
I know. And that's, but I mean, that's okay, because a lot of this, like all of this transformation in UX that we were just talking about, that's really just been a huge wave over the last decade. I think it's all built upon free open source software, right?
Yeah.
Like it all starts with the kernel to me. So because I'm not a hardware nerd, but like, it's all, so we can't, it's not like we can be like, oh, we're, I was going to say a-holes, but we can't say we're jerks because we want to use this free software. Like, no, I mean, that's in our DNA, right? Like, well, we want to figure out a free way to do it. So it's like, you gotta, that's a balance. That's a balance for, and that's why I really like product marketing where I work, because you get into some of that. We call it packaging, right? Like, how are you going to package your product so that you're giving away for free what's really valuable for free, and that makes the customer want to use it, but you're also like setting your boundaries around your product. Like this is their gold, and here's how we want to monetize that. And I think that's like fundamentally like an unsolved problem, like how to do that well. And VC money has been an interesting right? Like, so this last decade of UX growth has also been a decade of incredible venture capital investment in technology. And like, I don't know, I saw some articles about this a couple years ago, like just all the things that we think are cheap, like I remember when Uber and Lyft like raised their prices, and it was like, yeah, like this is how much it actually costs. But before this, your experience was being subsidized by various venture capital firms. I think that's true. Right. So figuring out like how to transition into this next phase of the economy is also part of that. Anyway, this is a huge digression from your marketing question, but
no, but it's really not, because for me, the way I approach things is like the same rules still apply there. You can use the Uber subsidized with VC money, which makes Uber look like a cost center. That applies directly to your DevOps team or your network team that you work in your day-to-day job. You're viewed in the company as a cost center.
Yeah.
But if you approach it from a marketing perspective, then you can change the perception of your team from being a cost center to being, a value for your company.
Yeah. And I think that's challenging because for network specifically, because it's so, to me, it feels like the very bottom layer of what we think of as the stack. And it's so ubiquitous at this point that it's really seen as like a utility, right? It's
Right.
seen like a utility. So it's really, really hard to make, like, it's a very tempting thing. Actually, it's really interesting. We had this conversation internally really recently. It's really tempting to just market everything based on like, well, nothing works without the network. So like, I'm selling you this new network monitoring tool and like, you're really important. Nothing works without the network. Make sure you say that in your meetings. Like, well, I need this new tool because nothing works without the network. And I think like what we found is that doesn't always work because it's just it's so fundamental that it's now just part of like our conceptualization of like, I expect for there to be a toilet. I expect to have water. I expect to be able to charge my device. And that's just like the way it is. And so, yeah, how you make that transformation from thinking of something as a cost center to really like feeling the value and wanting to invest in it. I mean, I think when it comes to the network, where that comes in is like the digital experience, right? So like talking about what we were talking about in terms of like how the network performs really matters to your customers, really matters to the people who are accessing your services. And Warren, you had some interesting points that like that goes both ways, right? It matters to them. It matters to them both ways. And you have to design around, if you have a really high performing network, then maybe you need to design around the way that interaction appears to the user. I had never thought about that before. But yeah, I think that's where the value comes in, is thinking about that end user experience. But also the sort of hug ops sort of strategy comes to mind too. Like, I think you need to balance that. Like, hey, network engineer, I understand you're always like, you're often being blamed. It's mean time to instance for you. You've got to be in all of these calls. You've got to defend the fundamental like primacy of your service and how critical it is to the entire business running. But at the same time, people expect it so much that you don't get the credit. Like, you gotta put those hugs out there. But then you also have to be like, but yeah, like if you were, I mean, if you can be better at your job, then like people are gonna have a better experience. If you can have the tools that you need to raise the bar, then like that's gonna be good for everyone. So it's kind of like it's a hug and a nudge or something.
It's a bro hug, two pats and release.
Oh, there we go. See, I don't get a lot of those, so I need that mansplained to me.
I think there's an interesting corollary here too that you touched on a little bit, was that going and performing the marketing or content strategy requires understanding. And I think there's twofold there, right? Like, not only it's good to know that is a good expectation to have, but if you are on the technology side, hands-on, or that there is alternative paths out there that your skills, if you like to communicate, if you like to talk about this, if you think you can, work with these other teams, either side by side or with them, because actually, I think this goes into education as well. You call it thought leadership, but even if you're a direct contact, they totally get it. They haven't spent as much time actually thinking about how to convey that effectively to not just their executives who signed the approval on the product, but all the rest of their teams. Like, I feel like we get lots of engineers in who are like, we know we need to do something. Do you have docs on how to do this or how to do that? Because we may not buy your product, but wow, this is such a huge problem for us that we would love to, like, I need to teach other people about how to solve this issue.
Yeah. Oh, and that's huge. I mean, that's kind of like the developer advocacy angle, I would say.
Yeah, for sure.
And I think that plays super well with, and And I think this is also like another sign of the culture change that we were talking about that came around the time that Kubernetes became so ubiquitous. Is just like people like the idea of like sharing their knowledge and like building each other up. I think that's really like a great way to go. And as a company, if you can demonstrate that you are willing to spend time, energy, spend your resources on like building the core competency of the community so that they can, like what Will was saying, passing that knowledge along so that the next generation of engineers can really like start where you like be up on your shoulders, right? I'm coming up with all kinds of metaphors to describe this, but it's like, I think if you can truly demonstrate that as a company, that's one of the absolute best ways to appeal to a developer audience. And I don't know, just one thing to say on the marketing front, you mentioned like this is like an option for folks if they think that they can be good at communicating about this. It's very nice to hear the two of you talk about this in this way and acknowledge that this is a hard problem, because what I found in my career is that a lot of technical folks believe that marketing is like a thing that anyone can do. Like because it's like a soft skill set or something, and they're like, oh, I could do that. I just choose not to do that, right? Like I'm choosing to be a technologist, or I'm choosing to be a CEO, or whatever they're choosing to be. But they're like, oh, you've chosen this path of marketing, but like really, I could do it better. But then when you sit down, and I think I was probably that person. Like I ended up in a marketing job, as I think I told you, by accident. Like I wasn't like, oh, I'm gonna go on this great marketing career dive and see, this is where my talents really lie. But I think I was one of those engineers who was better at like the cross-functional communication part. I ended up doing a lot of that. And then a product manager that I was working for was like, there's this job opening and I think you'd be really good at that. Have you ever considered being a technical marketer? And I happened to want off of the team that I was on at the time. And I was like, sure, I'll try it. Right. It was a lateral move. And I think one of the hardest things, and you can see based on this episode, I am looking at the runtime. This is the hardest thing for me personally, is to say something in like 3 words, right? To really like get to the heart of like what gets to your heart, like really communicate something that's going to resonate, that you're going to remember, and that also is true. I think like where
that last one, that's the trouble. That's where the issue comes in.
Well, yeah, and the bullshit meter, oh God, I just said it. The bullshit meter I said it 3 times, on my audience is like very high. And I think that's one of the hallmarks of our field, is that we're skeptics. And we would love to say that we do not want to be marketed to. And we can smell marketing a mile away. And that's how that sort of education track and the developer advocacy track have like been such a foothold, because it's not marketing, but it is marketing, right?
Right.
But I think like beyond that, like really, it is important we see ourselves as like, we're selling a platform to people who need it. Like our job is to find people who actually are a good fit for and actually just trained the sales team on this last week. It's like, you're not trying to sell the product. Like you're not trying to jam it down anyone's throat, right? You're trying to find the people who are really excited about streaming telemetry. They're really excited about the real-time data that they can get from our tool. They don't want to wait for 5-minute polling. They don't want to refresh the page. That experience is not enough for them. And so if we can find those people, then our job is easy, right? Then we just show them the tool and we're like, let's get this set up in your environment and let's get you going so that you can be successful at what you do. And I think like that's the dream. But really, if you want to do that, you still have to figure out a short way to describe what you do and why it matters. And that is one of the hardest. It's one of like, the shorter something has to be, the harder it is to make it good. And it's really it's a challenge. It's a huge challenge. So that's what has driven me into this field. It's just like the unexpected challenge of kind of marrying these 2 passions of mine, being a technologist and also being being a blabbermouth and figuring out like where do I land with that and how can I connect with my audience with that. And it is a great challenge for anyone who wants to do it. And I will say like you are a bit of a, it's fun to be like a bit of a unicorn, and I've experienced that. Like, why do you guys have me on this podcast? I don't know. Like, but because I'm a unicorn. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Because a lot of us with technical backgrounds, our perception of marketing is, well, yeah, I could wake up at 11, pound a few martinis, and hit the golf course. I could do marketing, sure, and that's the perception of it.
Yeah, you're just writing words on the page, right?
Yeah,
like,
I saw Mad Men. I know what you guys do.
having I guess found a couple of companies now, there is such a huge aspect here that I feel like you're even underselling, Rosalind. It's you've got not only is it just too many words to fit in, but sometimes you don't even have words at all. Like you first have to come up with them to actually even say, like maybe you have a feeling or an emotion you want to convey. There's just so many different aspects there that have to end up not just on a marketing page, but in a sales call, and actually figuring out what that is. It's a huge struggle for sure. It is not, and that's not to say there aren't tons of marketers who are bad at their jobs or doing a different job, which is like doing some sort of analysis on big data to perform A/B tests. Or looking at where traffic is coming in through, depending on your height in the funnel. You can do all those things, but that's not content marketing. That's reviewing some numbers, which for sure is an easier job to do than what we've been talking about here.
I mean, I think there's a lot to that. The marketing is, you point out, it's a pretty diverse sort of skill set and product marketing is really like being able to harness all of that sort of engine in a way that will connect with your audience in a way. I mean, for B2B product marketing, it's like that's going to connect with your audience in a way that's authentic enough to get you in the top of funnel gate, right? And then but the other thing is you got to connect it with what the product does. And I think this is where, like, I've worked with product marketers who don't have a technical background, and there are plenty of them out there, and there's some wonderful ones out there. But I've had arguments with people like that about like, well, I'm not going to say this because our product doesn't do that. Like, yeah, you can tell me that we have a security story. This is one that comes up all the time. And this is not true of Kentik. We do have a security story, but a lot of companies want to say that their product has a security story, and it just doesn't, right? Or they want to and they want to tout this thing that they heard that the product can do. And you're like, where does that, it's like this sort of ball of energy gathers at a B2B company about a technical product and what it can do and the power of it. It's like this hype gathers up. And then as like a product marketer coming from a technical perspective, you have to be like, okay, here's your ball. This is what's at the core of the ball. And like, I'm excited about the hype and I want to keep the ball rolling, but we have to make sure that what's in there is solid, that it's going to be helpful to our customers, and then because it's not, I'm so afraid of triggering that bullshit meter. And it's definitely like, maybe that's why I'm destined to be a middle, I don't know. I'm not really a middle manager. I kind of am. Yeah. So maybe that's why I'm destined to like, I'm never going to be in charge of the executive buyer messaging. I sort of am, but I'm definitely like I am more afraid of lying. Like, I do not want to lie to people. I do not want to get caught up on the hype train. And that was really hard for me with our AI product in particular, because I don't want to get caught up on that hype train. And I really want to connect with the audience that is skeptical about AI. And I really wanted our messaging to be like, all other AI is like bullshit. I know, but this one, you should really take a look at it. I wanted to acknowledge that, but it was hard to figure out how to do that in 3 words.
I just go with the same talk. It's like, all AI is bullshit. So is ours, but it's slightly better.
I mean, but no, yeah, it's true. It's like just the honesty, I think, is really important. And it's really important to me in connecting to folks and letting them know that, you've been in their shoes, I think. So it really comes down to like empathy, right? I think empathy is a huge part of it. Just being able to communicate that and really authentically, um, like emanate that in your communications. And I think the companies that do that really well, uh, can be very successful. So yeah.
Yeah, because in cases like that, it's really not about the AI. It's what the AI allows you to do that you care about.
Yeah. Yeah, it's about what the humans can do with it, and that story always resonates really well, and I think that's why LLM has particularly been so, like, why it just experienced such an incredible rise over the last couple years, because it really is fundamentally about, like, it's a human, um, particularly human interface for AI, I think.
Yeah,
Yeah, all about empowering the human. Yeah.
for sure. All right. Good chat.
Oh, great chat, great chat. I really enjoyed talking with you all,
All right, ready
actually.
for break. No, we
Really
still have to
fun.
do picks. We still have to do
Okay.
picks. Um, Warren, I'm putting you on the spot this week. What'd you
Yeah.
bring?
Yeah, well, I had something, but then after the conversation started, I got a flash of what I should actually be my pick, and that's going to be the Phoenix Project, which is
Oh
a
yeah.
great book in the DevOps space about a hypothetical company that separates their ops team from their development team, and they just struggle with it in a lot of ways, and the company almost folds. And I think there's a lot to do in the book with education and overcoming some of those early challenges that we talked about in the podcast today. It's actually a great book as well. So if you're anywhere in the development engineering space, I can't imagine anyone on this call today wouldn't enjoy reading it. And you may be able to put names and cry a little bit on the inside when you see some of the problems that they face. But I highly recommend it.
For sure.
I gotta check that out.
Yeah, definitely a cool read. All right, Rosalind, did you bring us a pick this week?
Yeah, I mean, mine is definitely not as linear. I can just talk about the book I'm reading right now, which is really interesting to me. Okay, so it's my partner always calls me a corporate biatch, and I told you that I briefly worked in more of like a direct to developer B2B company, and that the enterprise sales model is a bit more my jam. I've sort of discovered that in my career, and so I decided that I should learn more about corporate stuff and understand like how it came to be. So I'm reading this book, The Corporation That Changed the World. And it's about the East India Company. And it's really interesting because if you think about the VOC and the East India Company, which were some of the world's first corporations, you probably know that they went around the world and wreaked complete havoc on people and ecosystems, and exhibited such stark corruption and violence that it's almost, I mean, it's just breathtaking to kind of think about that and read about that. And that's something that we're dealing with now, I think, in our society, is how to move forward through that, being able to acknowledge it. But it's really interesting to learn about how it influenced like the way that corporations operate today. And how, we talk about how a corporation is like has the same rights as an individual. How did that come to
Right.
be? And what's the history there? So I'm a kind of history nerd, and that's what I'm reading now. And I would have, it's dense, but it's not super long, so I highly recommend it. Yeah.
So they're like the root of all evil.
Yeah. Like let's stare it in the face if we want to move forward to a new economic model as a society, which that's another episode too. But we definitely need to know, like, how does the one that we have now, like, where did we go wrong? I think is really important to understand. Yeah.
That's cool. I'd heard of that book, but I didn't realize it was about the East India Trading Company.
Yeah.
I'll have to check that out because that sounds pretty cool.
What's your pick?
So my pick is straight from the nerd archives. It's the K9S tool for managing, or not really for managing. It's for visualizing your Kubernetes clusters. Instead of typing out 64 word Kubernetes commands. K9S is just a CLI tool, k9scli.io, that lets you poke around and look at all the stuff that's going on in Kubernetes quickly and easily. And the thing that I like most about it is it has Vim style bindings. So you can just use like the J and K keys to arrow up and arrow down and different things like that, and hit L for logs. And my favorite feature is when you go to the log view mode, it's tailing the logs, but you can hit the letter M and it just draws a straight line across the last log so that when new logs come in, you can scroll back up to see where you made the line and then just see the logs that have shown up since you last looked at it. And so there's a lot of tools in this category, but K9S is definitely my favorite. So that's my pick for the week.
I was worried you were going to say there was like some sort of AI interface.
Not yet.
It's coming though, right?
It's coming. It's
No,
coming.
that would be perfect. Little AI interface where I can just type WTF and it says, well, actually,
yeah, right. Yeah, there is something going on right now. It's these fonts in this namespace, which are the issue that you want to take a look at.
Yeah, because that's where my line of questioning always starts.
That is the best AI entry point. That is the best LLM. I'm going to suggest that. I'm going to take that back to our product team.
Right.
WTF. Got to be able to respond to that one. Yeah.
Yeah, because literally I can't formulate a more accurate question right at the moment.
Nope.
Awesome. Well, Rosalind, thank you so much for being on the show. This has been a blast.
Yeah, really enjoyed the conversation. I really appreciate you having me. And looking forward to continuing to listen and see what you get up to talking about next.
Yeah, for sure. And if you want to come back on, and because we picked up a couple of different tangents there to go off on, if you ever want to come back on and go down those paths, I'd love to have you back on the show.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome. Okay, I'm gonna take you up on that.
Yeah. All right, cool. And for everyone listening, whether you're listening to the recorded podcast or if you're catching one of the live streaming episodes on LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, or X, aka Twitter, thank you for listening.